In the next session, I'll be presenting a talk which I actually gave earlier in the year to New Zealand's National Digital Forum Conference. That's the main annual conference that New Zealand have for everything digital relating to the cultural heritage sector. So I'll be talking about the current state of artificial intelligence, but particularly looking at how we can involve people to achieve the best results out of this technology. We're seeing AI getting used across the board in every little piece of the systems we use, including basic things like checking spelling and grammar, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to provide an accurate result back. It doesn't necessarily know the exact context of different spellings of the same word. And so artificial intelligence, or AI as we would more commonly abbreviate it to, is software that allows computers to make decisions, simulate human learning, and also solve a whole variety of different problems. It's doing that by harvesting or copying huge amounts of data and then analyzing and making use of that data to then do things like improve existing workflows, provide automatic recommendations for things, perhaps even generate entirely new content, which sounds pretty amazing, doesn't it? We have probably for the last 20 years heard some quite positive predictions of the futures of AI, but sometimes those predictions have been overly rosy. Here's a typical news article from 7 years ago with the promise of self-driving cars. And then if we advance to this year, we can see there's now a slightly more cautious view of that coming about. And so there's now genuine concerns about AI from different levels and maybe a more accurate analysis of the potential of that. So there's considerations of whether the content that's being generated is factually correct, whether the rights of individual people are being respected, whether the content's up to date, and so on. So there's those pitfalls now that we're becoming more aware of. And so we need to ask some hard questions about these systems. We need to ask things like, are the rights of the original content creators being respected? Is the use of AI in a particular project just because we can, because it's like the next amazing new thing, or because it is actually delivering real benefits to our users? We also need to think about where the data's copied from. Did that source actually grant access to that in the first place? Is that content actually still up to date? So just because AI might potentially be a cheaper solution for a particular problem doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right solution if we consider the pros and cons carefully. And so what we need to be doing is making sure that people are involved in these processes. So using our human or analog intelligence to provide safeguards at different points in the process. So I'll be looking today at some of the technologies that are around and parts that people can play in those processes. New technology often follows a pattern called the Gartner hype cycle. So that's a pattern for showing how technology goes through periods of excessive expectations versus what the actual reality of that technology is. So you start off with a new technology triggering this cycle. So you quickly get a lot of press attention. Lots of people are saying positive things about the potential of whatever this great new device is. And we reach the peak of inflated expectations. From there, we might then crash down, realizing, well, much of what's being said isn't really possible. And we fall down into the trough of disillusionment. From there, you slowly make your way up the slope of enlightenment, which is where you've got some users making use of this technology and getting benefits, but it's not quite always reliable. And then finally, we ultimately reach the plateau of productivity, where that technology is in the mainstream. We're not even necessarily thinking of it as being tech that we're using anymore. It's just reliable and we're all making use of it. And so there's a whole range of different AI tools out there, and they're at different points in the cycle. But where they are in the cycle helps us consider how people can be involved in that. And that can be everything from assessing any biases that are in those particular systems, cross-checking the results that are coming out of it, maybe adding additional contextual information, so still human-created content on top of what the AI is generating. So one of the most mature areas of AI is image analysis, and that's just used in a whole range of things, everything from detecting your license plate when you drive into a car parking space to here in this example, which is Vernon Browser, where we're using color analysis to provide another way of navigating collections. It also goes a step beyond just navigating that. We also use that to generate text data to improve people's searching. So somebody could come along and search for red fire engine, find the right painting, even though it wasn't catalogued describing that, because we've been able to analyze those colors and add the right text keywords about those colors. So that's something where we're getting predictable results. We're just following simple mathematical formulas to do that. It's still important that people have the option of reviewing that output. And so within Vernon Browser, we have an administration section where, for instance, on this artwork, there's a piece of bright pink. That's falling outside of what the AI is tagging because it's been told to look at blocks of color that are more than a certain area of the picture. And so we as humans can look at that and we can see the bright pink area, but it's not flagging that as one of the top 5 colors. But within Vernon Browser, you could manually tag that as well. So you've still got that review stage. We can go a step further and start tagging subject keywords. Here I've analyzed these images and I've tagged everything which has something similar to a circle shape. And again, that's providing new connections between artworks that we didn't have from the original content created. It's still important, though, to have that review step. So again, in Vernon Browser, where we have automatic addition of subject tags using Google's Cloud Vision AI product, there's a page where you can analyze all of the top tags, and you've got the option of blocking tags. Here, for example, a whole lot of the photographs in this art collection got tagged as stock photography. And that probably indicates some of the source content that Google had when it created this whole data model. None of these are stock photographs. They're all artist photographs in an art collection, and the artists probably aren't that happy about having them tagged as stock photography. So that's an example where we've effectively blocked that tag across the whole site. And so within Vernon Browser, you can block a tag across the board or just alter them on an individual work. The next layer of analysis we can do is understanding the audio and video content, so providing text transcriptions. And that's super powerful. It's allowing people to watch those videos if they're hearing impaired or want the sound turned off, and to more easily find those videos because you've got all that text content there. However, it is still prone to error. So this is a part where we're in that slope of enlightenment. We're getting some benefits, but we have to use it with caution. Here's a typical mistake. This caver is describing that they're at the Dorf store. I'm pretty sure there's no Dorf store in New Zealand. He's actually at a cave that's called Dorf's Door, and it's misheard that and labeled it as the Dorf store. So sometimes these results can be incorrect or actually offensive, particularly if they're in foreign language or indigenous language terms. So it's really important that there's people involved in those processes reviewing that content before it's publicly shared. You can go a step further by creating your own data models. So that's a concept where instead of using the AI's data that it has by default, you can say only work with this set of data when you're trying to analyze new material. In this particular example, the Australian National Film and Sound Archive created a data model using all of their existing catalogue records, all of their existing transcriptions, and then they used that AI data model to then create new transcriptions for the rest of the collection. And so that worked better in 2 ways. They've confined the source data to a known set of kind of validated information, and that source data has a whole lot of their specific technical and indigenous language terms already in it, so they're getting better results from those transcriptions as a result. And so you often hear this acronym GPT. So GPT stands for generative. It's something where it's got a set of content or ingredients, and it can generate new things based on that. And part of that step, it's pre-trained to do that generative step in a certain way. You can think of that as recipes, where it's got all of these raw ingredients and you've given it some instructions for what kind of range of outcomes you want to allow. And then lastly, there are a type of software called transformers. Transformers work with sequential information. And if you think of a sentence, that's a sentence of individual words where the exact order has meaning. And so transformers are particularly good at working with natural language, where you've got these long sentences of words where the whole order needs to be known to make the most sense out of it. And so ChatGPT is one of the most popular AI models, and they're one of the products that allows you to create these custom data models. So that's something that's possible with the paid version of ChatGPT. So you can just upload a whole set of data. It's designed for non-programmers. So it's just got a kind of simple wizard you work through, picking the data you want and choosing options for how you want ChatGPT to work with that. That includes restricting ChatGPT on reusing that material for other purposes. If you don't want it to be used to train ChatGPT to be better for other people, you want it just to be your own private project. We can use things like ChatGPT to generate new content. So that might be as simple as generating a list of ideas. Here I've asked it for games that teenagers might play in a museum. And it's created a whole lot of interesting ideas, many of which would be worth exploring further. But again, we need to carefully view that. We need to have critical thinking, looking at these ideas, thinking, do they actually make sense within the context of our organization? Are they actually correct or appropriate? AI has sometimes been described as a student who's eager to please, but sometimes lies to you. One thing that AI is particularly known for is joining together different ideas that are in the data model that don't actually naturally go together in the real world. And so that creates something that's called an AI hallucination, where it's creating something that it thinks makes sense from all of this raw data, but doesn't actually logically fit together. You see things like that on AI recipe sites, where it starts joining ingredients which just aren't going to produce something that's edible. Here's an example where I've asked the AI, what's the world record for crossing the English Channel on foot? There is no world record, but it's still given me an answer because it's trying to please me and try and work out that. Apparently it's 14 hours, which is even slower than swimming. The National Museum in New Zealand, Te Papa, has recently been trialing using AI. They've been trying to generate object descriptions. So they've got several million objects in their collection, many of which don't have descriptions. And so they've just got a challenge of not having enough people to create descriptions to meaningfully use these objects in all the ranges of things they would like to. So what they've done is they took their existing public programming interface. So that's a way that you can connect to the raw public data, and they let ChatGPT access that. And then they reformatted that data so that it was in simple sentences. So the original data might have said painting 1930s Auckland, and they just created a kind of simple sentence saying, this is a painting that was made in Auckland in X date. And that was then data that ChatGPT could understand and do something useful with. They did find that it worked better on objects where they had multiple images, because then the AI had more kind of source material about that object to try and describe it accurately. So they did this project on several hundred objects just to see how that would work. They found that every single description required some manual correction. So there was not a single description where it was something that was accurate out of the box. But they did find that a curator took half an hour to write a description from scratch, whereas it was taking about 3 minutes for that same curator to rewrite and edit what was created as a draft by the AI. So they were getting genuine speed benefits. They've decided that if they ever did do this in their production data, they would clearly label that as being AI generated as well, so that the end users know that there's been this automated step that may introduce some errors. They also found that the type of material it works with makes a huge difference. So mass-produced objects are the easiest. The AI often has a lot of similar examples of the same thing that it can draw additional information from when it's trying to create that description. Unique objects like artistic works are a little bit harder. Sometimes that's a common artist where it can draw upon other similar works by the same artist to create a better description. Images which are technical subjects or where the content isn't very clear becomes much more difficult for the AI to work with. And then lastly, you have some images where the content of that image is sensitive. So particularly things like pictures of people, you have to question whether you're okay with feeding that into an AI system where they might be reusing that image later, or where the content that comes out might be offensive or incorrect in a dangerous manner. So then we get on to the idea of generating more complex formats of data. So we can create entirely new images now using AI. This is one where I've asked the AI to generate an image of cave rescue for me. And it's created a reasonably believable image. But if I look closely, I can see that the rescuers are faceless and that the stretcher is levitating there, which is probably not correct. So generative AI can be useful. So we can create drafts of blog posts. We can create drafts of descriptions of objects. We can generate images for a whole variety of purposes. But we are only on that slope of enlightenment that it's not yet fully reliable. You really need people in the process to be proofing everything that's coming back to make sure that it's actually okay to share that on a wider basis. We also see that natural language processing of AI increasingly getting used, with chatbots being the main example. Some chatbots aren't really AI. This is an example of a water services provider in Auckland who have a chatbot on their website. And in fact, there's no kind of clever technology there. It's essentially just a flow chart of questions where they know that these are the 4 main type of water faults and you pick from those, and then it's just leading you down a flow chart of pre-coded information. So that's very safe to use. You know exactly the kind of output you're going to get from there, and it will only respond to certain questions. However, the more open that the chatbot is to a variety of questions, the more unreliable the results could be. Here's an open-ended chatbot that the State Library of Queensland did. They created a chatbot which was in the persona of a Gallipoli war soldier, where you could use that chatbot to learn more about Gallipoli. They found within the first few days, people were abusing that service by trying to trick it into coming up with strange answers that were outside of what would provide reliable information. So we had people, for instance, fooling the chatbot into impersonating Fraser Crane from the TV show Cheers, acting as if he was stuck in the trenches of Gallipoli. So there are those risks that it is amazing technology to interact with these chatbots and have just natural language conversations. But the more open-ended those conversations are, the less likely it is that it's actually going to be accurate. That same natural language processing is also getting incorporated in search engines. So we're seeing, for instance, in Google, the concept of an AI overview, where it's not just looking at the individual words we're searching on, but it understands the entire sentence and it can paraphrase the content it has into a quick overview. You still need your critical thinking skills to look at those answers and decide, well, is that actually accurate? Is it up to date? Is it something that I could use within my organization? Here I've asked, what is it that makes the New Zealand bird the Kia green? And it's given me an answer which seems reasonably believable, but it's also said that that answer is based on a thread on Reddit. And so that might be accurate, but is it actually suitable to use within a museum object label, for instance? We also have to consider that there's biases at all layers of the AI system. So the original developers and companies that make it, they've got their own agendas, they've got their own biases. The data that we're feeding into there may underrepresent certain demographics, may also reinforce existing stereotypes. The ultimate system that they develop might also be used for a particular purpose which suits the corporation that built it, but that may not actually be in our own best interests. And then finally, the access to these AI systems isn't universal. So there may be some people who already don't have great access to technology, and they're even further disadvantaged by these systems. So the digital divide grows even greater. And so there's this phrase of, with great power comes great responsibility. We have to be asking ourselves whether the specific use of AI is actually helping our users better discover real world objects, places, stories, people. There's also the argument that in some cases a digital experience isn't necessarily the best experience for our visitor. There's still a place for analog experiences within the museum world. There's a reason why things like physical board games are seeing a resurgence. People are finding a desire for real world experiences and non-screen type experiences. And so they still have a role within our museum sector as well. So we could conversely say that with great power comes no responsibility. AI is a new way to make money. AI is a corporation behind all of this. So this can be in conflict with the altruistic goals that we have within the museum sector. Some AI developers may feel very little responsibility to the original creators that made all of this content that powers their whole system. And they may feel little responsibility about any negative impacts of the AI systems they've built. And so we've got these three broad areas of AI which we're seeing advance. You've got generative AI, where we can create new text content like descriptions and articles, as well as images. We've got computer vision, so we're actively using that in our own products, but we're being cautious to the point of only adding in AI when we feel like we've got proper safeguards for you as the administrators for how that AI is made use of within the system. And then lastly, you've got the natural language processing to improve searching and to do things like chatbots. The other side of this, though, is the risk. And so the Global Risk Advisory Council has marked AI as being the #1 risk to corporations in this coming year. And so they've marked possible risks as prejudiced decision-making, where you're making a decision which was maybe unfairly directed in a certain way because of a response you got from AI, using it in some kind of unethical manner, or for use in possible harmful or deceptive ways. So we need to make careful assessments as people in these processes for whether the way that we're using AI is acceptable. And so part of that is having an AI policy within your organization. So that's something that we do within Vernon Systems. And so that's something where you can give clear guidelines to staff in terms of what AI products you've decided are reasonable to use, what different ways they should be used, and what kinds of safeguards you've decided are necessary in terms of the data that's being fed out of that and how that data is then exposed, whether it's just internally in your organization or to a wider set of people. And so AI is really great at taking all of the source content, paraphrasing it in different ways, maybe even rewriting it for a different intended audience with a different tone. However, there's real concerns that the content that AI generates isn't as diverse as what real people can create. So the concern is not whether human creativity is being compromised, but that it possibly already has. And so there's often comparisons with the Industrial Revolution for AI, and there certainly are a lot of parallels. The speed of the change and the broadness of the society that it's affecting, the number of different things we work on that are being touched by this new piece of technology. I think, like the Industrial Revolution, we're facing the same problem with legislation, that we're still catching up with trying to provide safeguards for people with these systems. That at the moment we've got developers plowing on with building AI, but there's not a lot of regulation in terms of how they're building those systems and how we're using those. And I think that will slowly catch up, making AI more acceptable and more ethical for us to use. But at the moment, we're in that kind of early phase where there's a lot of things being built, but not a lot of regulation around how this whole system works. I think the other main difference is that the Industrial Revolution allowed us to mechanize labor. So it freed up people ultimately to do other things in their lives, that they had all of these new machines where they could spend that time doing other things. Whereas with AI, we're effectively mechanizing our creative thinking and decision making. And it's not yet clear really what the ultimate effect will be on us as humans. Is that going to make us think in different ways and better ways, or will it actually be to our harm in some way? And so, along with AI, having people involved in those processes can help us do three different things. We can use our own creative input to take what AI produces and take it a step further. So both adding additional creative inputs, adding additional creative or contextual information. We can use our critical thinking skills to make sure that we're using AI in places that are ethically appropriate, and to analyze what it's coming back with. So looking at those answers that AI is giving us, following back to the source data. So things like that AI overview in Google, where it's got the links, actually following those links and seeing, is that article still up to date? Is it actually an article you would trust? And then lastly, all of the ethical thinking behind that. So just making sure we're using AI for things that actually make sense for us as individuals and as organizations. And so those are all areas that we as individuals can think of. So making use of our own creative skills and our own critical thinking skills, but also on an organization level, having policies that promote the use of our staff as creative skills, as creative inputs into these processes, and thinking about how AI is being used in conjunction with those skills. Thank you.